Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar titled Using Positive Behavioral Supports. This afternoon's presentation is being hosted by Transition Matters, a program through the Family Support Center of New Jersey, and presented by Laura Henderson and Nicole Pellissieri, board-certified behavior analyst representing the Center for Neurological and Neurodevelopmental Health, also known as CNNH. Just a second, I apologize, guys. There was a delay. The Family Support Center of New Jersey is a clearinghouse of up-to-date information on national, state, and local family support programs, services, and disabilities. The Family Support Center of New Jersey offers a one-stop shopping approach to individuals seeking information on disabilities and services by providing them with easy access to a comprehensive array of supports. The Transition Matters portion of our website, which can be found at transitionmattersnj.org, assists families and professionals in identifying resources to successfully transition your child or student with special needs to adulthood. Resources such as webinars, in-person workshops, and statewide and regional contact information are made available. Before we begin, let's take a moment to go over how you can participate during today's web event. Everyone should have their own control panel in the upper right corner of your screen that looks similar to the one here. Use the orange arrow to open and hide your control panel. To listen to the webinar, you have two audio options to choose from: mic and speakers and telephone. If you can't hear well using your computer speakers, you can elect to use your telephone to listen to today's web event. In order to maintain the best sound quality possible, all but the presenter will be muted throughout the session. If you have any questions or comments, you can submit them using the questions panel. All questions will be collected until the end of the webinar and addressed as long as time allows. At this time, I would like to welcome today's presenters, Laura Henderson and Nicole Pellissieri. Nicole, Laura, welcome.
Hi, thanks, Melanie. Hi, everyone out there in webinar world. As Melanie said, we are behavior analysts from the Center for Neurological and Neurodevelopmental Health, also known as the CNNH. And what we do here at the CNNH is a variety of different things. We are a multidisciplinary practice. So we have a variety of clinicians with various backgrounds, including neurology, psychology, nurse practitioners, behavior analysts, and we also have a creative arts team. And we really see individuals with a variety of different diagnoses and needs, anything from autism and epilepsy to ADHD to general behavior challenges. And we work both in the office. We're located in Camden County in Gibbsboro. That is our main office. And Laura and I are also in Atlantic County, consulting in school districts in places like Atlantic City and Hamilton Township, Mays Landing. So we are in a variety of different places as well. So that's a little bit about us and who we are. Oh, that wasn't the right button. We're not able to move through the...
Oh, there we go. We're good.
Oh,
we're good.
Okay.
So what we're going to do is we're going to take you through what applied behavior analysis is, what we look at are defining the behaviors. So figuring out what we're actually looking at. For example, we might be called into a classroom or a family might talk to us about their child displaying aggression. But aggression can mean a variety of things for different kids. So we wanted to be able to define behaviors. And then we want to figure out, well, why are these behaviors occurring? Based on that information, we then develop our interventions. So these are just some of the problem behaviors we typically deal with. So like I said before, aggression. A lot of times we are called in for kids displaying non-compliant behavior. Disruptive behavior, which can mean a variety of things. It could vary from speaking out of turn in the classroom, or throwing things across the room. Self-injurious behavior, socialization difficulties. And then we get into some other behaviors as well, such as self-stimulatory behavior, those ritualistic behaviors.
So why do problem behaviors occur? That's one of the things when we're taking a behavioral approach to some of these maladaptive behaviors. Those are some of the first things that we have to look at. So we're looking at antecedents and consequences. The antecedent is what happens right before the problem behavior that might be the trigger. And the term right before is a little bit broader than just right before. So we might be looking at what happened within the last 15 minutes, let's say, that might have triggered a negative behavior. And then we look at the consequence. What happened right after the behavior occurred that may be maintaining this, that may increase the behavior to occur in the future? Was the individual given attention, or was a demand placed on them? Were they denied access to something? Did they have to transition away from a preferred activity? So we're looking at all of these things when we're looking at antecedents and consequences. Today's presentation is really geared more towards the home environment for caregivers and parents. So some of the antecedents that we commonly come across when we're working with families are demands, a lot of times related to self-care routines. Being told no can be a trigger. Transitioning from a preferred activity like an iPad or a video game to have to go eat dinner or go to a store. And also removal of a preferred item or activity without fair warning. If a brother or sister comes up and snatches a toy, that could create a whole behavior challenge.
Some other antecedents that we typically will deal with are social situations. Situations in which a child might be losing during a game. We can find this when siblings play together or at the playground during recess at school. Another antecedent that we look at that most people wouldn't typically recognize is low attention. Is that child engaging in certain behaviors because he or she currently isn't receiving any attention and wants attention? Other factors that you have to consider are just simply typical things that may produce an increase in maladaptive behaviors. Being tired, being hungry. Another one that is not on the slide is, are there any medication changes that are going on?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And some of the consequences. Consequences are what maintain those behaviors and what, like we just said, possibly help them occur again in the future, even if we don't want them to. So you have 4 main consequences. There are obviously more than this, but these are the main ones that we come across, and they're attention. And attention includes anything from eye contact and verbal statements to even touching or pointing, any kind of interaction with the individual. Escape. Did the child engage in a behavior to get out of something that they didn't like? So if the child knows, oh, hey, it's time for me to brush my teeth, if I throw myself on the floor, eventually somebody's going to just come and scoop me up and put me in my bed, and I don't have to brush my teeth. They've learned that that behavior gets them out of the non-preferred activity. Access to a desired item. The best example for this is the food store. When you're in the grocery store and you see the kid at the checkout counter that might want something and engages in some crying or yelling and tantruming behavior, and to prevent a scene, or a lot of times parents will tell us they get embarrassed, they automatically give in and they get access to what they wanted. Another consequence is ignoring. When everybody in the environment ignores the child when they're engaging in a negative behavior. Ignoring is a little bit more challenging depending on the setting and who's around, because if the child has siblings or cousins or friends over, the adults may ignore the negative behavior, but you have other kids around, they might laugh or engage or start to interact with others in the environment the same way the person of interest is.
So what can we do about these things? One of the best things that we can do for kids is establish routines. Create a routine for morning time when kids are in school. School's typically based on a routine. And then during the evening hours, also establishing a nice routine. And how we can do that a lot of times is coming up with a nice visual schedule for kids, and this can vary depending upon age or developmental level. It can include pictures or words, and can really be useful in presenting the expectations for that morning time or evening time routine. And then also providing reinforcement and punishment consequences as well in regards to the behaviors that are demonstrated. And then a family contract or a school contract can really be effective as far as just letting everybody know what the expectations are. So letting parents know. A lot of times parents are on two different pages and they're going to respond in two different ways. We need everybody to respond to behaviors consistently. And if you have a child who is going in the school setting from classroom to classroom, not every teacher is going to respond in the same fashion. So we need everybody to be on the same page. And we also need to let the child know what the expectations are. So, routines. Again, helping create those expectations. It's always useful to let kids know what's going to happen before you actually go ahead and do it. Kids might have questions. There might be a change within the typical routine, and this might be a really great way to let them know, hey, look, there's something a little bit unexpected today. We might not be going to the same food store after school. We might have a substitute teacher when we're in school today. So just giving them a little bit of a warning helps sometimes. It also helps to eliminate power struggles. And this is really effective with, for example, establishing a morning time routine. Typically, kids will have to get up, get dressed, eat breakfast, brush their teeth, get their materials for school ready. So what you can do in order to eliminate that power struggle is provide them with a choice. Provide the child with a choice as far as saying, hey, you know what, do you want to get dressed first or do you want to eat breakfast first? Even something as subtle as that can really help to eliminate that power struggle. Mm-hmm. It also helps to really develop that sense of responsibility because you're going to help that child to maintain that schedule in the beginning, but the ideal goal is for that child to eventually create that schedule on his own or her own. And then it also helps to know, everybody likes to know what they're doing during their day. I check my calendar on my phone a million times before I leave the house in the morning just to make sure that I have everything all squared away for the day. Kids also need that sense of security. And then also pairing those routines, the compliance within those routines, the compliance with the transitions with reinforcement.
Mm-hmm. And so the biggest routines when we're working with families that we look at are the morning routine, bedtime routine, meal times, self-care, and chores. And some of the routines you see as we talk about them, there are similarities in what our suggestions would be to do to help regulate some of the problem behaviors. The first thing you'd want to do when we look at the morning is establish a consistent wake-up time. So we have families come in and talk to us and they say, oh, I have a really hard time getting out the door. You know, it always takes us 30 minutes or 40 minutes or we're always running an hour behind. The first thing that we suggest there is establish a consistent wake-up time both during the week and on the weekends. So the child gets used to waking up at a certain time, getting out of their pajamas at a certain time, having breakfast at a certain time. Very, very routine and structured. As that becomes more and more of a daily occurrence, you can start to add more flexibility in when opportunities allow for it. So for example, if on the weekends you don't have to be as rigid because you're noticing your child is getting up and getting dressed, you're no longer late when you need to leave the house, you can certainly add some flexibility in there and have like a pajama day, or do a backwards day and have breakfast for lunch or lunch for breakfast. A good way to help the child know what the expectations are in the morning is to set up a visual schedule and review the steps of that schedule when they wake up in the morning. So it was the last thing they heard at night when they woke up, and one of the first things that they're being exposed to in the morning. Another thing that we find is helpful for the families that we're working with is to plan as much as you possibly can. The more you can plan ahead, the less chaos a lot of times there is in the morning. So if we can have parents and kids work together, pick out clothes the night before. Lay the clothes out so when the child wakes up, they see, oh yeah, I picked this out with mom or dad or grandma yesterday, so I know I have to get up, get myself dressed, and there's no argument about what I'm going to wear today because I've already chosen it. So that's a nice way, a few good ways to make your morning routine a little bit easier. Sleep and bedtime routines. This kind of goes hand in hand with morning. So what do we know about sleep? We know that sleep promotes increased performance, and it helps increase memory, it helps increase alertness, and it decreases anxiety. We find that individuals that have a lack of sleep often tend to have more difficulty maintaining attention, often are withdrawn, and can have more significant behavior challenges. How do we deal with this? Same as in the morning routine, your bedtime routine should be consistent Sunday through Saturday. And again, this a lot of times can be a challenge because everybody's weekends are typically more relaxed and laid back than during the week. But if we're looking to instill a routine, 7 days a week, we want to have as close to the same thing occurring at the same time as possible. Another thing that we encourage for sleep routines are calming activities, relaxing activities about 10 to 15 minutes before going to bed. This is going to vary based on what helps your child calm down. It might be listening to music, it might be coloring. You want to avoid activities that are stimulating. So right before your child goes to bed, you don't want to have them go jump on the trampoline for 10 minutes. Because for some individuals, that might get them pumped up and ready to go. At the same time, depending on the needs of your particular child, jumping on the trampoline might be that last moment before they go to bed where they have to get that energy out before they can calm down. So that's really going to vary. You also want to choose a bedtime. Remember, it's going to be consistent, so you want a bedtime that's age appropriate. You don't want to put a 5-year-old to bed at 11 o'clock at night. We do see that often. You also don't want to put a 13-year-old to bed at 7:30 at night. When these occurrences happen, we notice that the kid that's maybe 13 and going to bed very early in the evening is up at 4 or 5 in the morning. And the younger child that's going to bed later in the evening may have irregular sleep patterns, may wake up several times, or if they sleep through the night, haven't gotten enough sleep and are waking up tired. And again, you can make bedtime fun. You can offer a choice of pajamas, or if that was the week you were changing the sheets, maybe your child has a choice of the sheets they want to put on their bed. Offer choices whenever appropriate.
And this meal times are, I think, difficult at this point to kind of get everybody around the table at the same time. Everybody's got, you know, a crazy schedule. There's after-school activities, parents work, different shifts, so it's difficult. But establishing at least like once or twice per week where you can all sit around as a family is really important. You know, not only, there's a lot of skills that can really be developed during meal time, and this doesn't always this doesn't only have to pertain to the home setting. I think when we go into schools, we look at a bunch of kids having their lunch at the cafeteria table, and it's almost like they're on this quick mission to get their lunch down their throats, and then it's off to the next class, or if it's off to recess, or but a great time to really work on a lot of skills. So a nice time to just have that interaction. If you're a parent, it's a really nice time to work on just talking with your kids, just spending that time with your kids, giving a lot of positive attention during that time. If you're an education staff member, a great time to help kids who might have some difficulties with social skills, to helping them to facilitate some of those social interactions with their peers. It's a nice way to kind of work on those skills in a natural setting. Also, fostering some of those independent skills. So if you're at home, again, offering a choice. Hey, you know, what do you want to make for dinner tonight? Okay, you know, you want to help me out? Okay, great. And kids can really, you know, help out, you know, depending upon their age again, and depending upon their skill level. Give them some sort of responsibility. They're probably going to be more motivated to sit down and eat that meal if they've helped create that meal. So, you know, that also can be part of that visual schedule that we already talked about. That can be one of their chore responsibilities, helping with, you know, preparing the meal, cleaning up, setting the table. And then just opening up and talking about things that happen during their day. Self-care. So we deal with a lot of kids who will demonstrate some noncompliance with self-care routines. Because if you think about morning time routine, they're getting ready to go to school. Not many, right? Most kids don't necessarily want to go to school. So you might have some resistance with brushing your teeth, getting dressed in the morning, just getting out the door. Again, great activity to have on that visual schedule and pairing it with that reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the time constraints in the morning really affect fostering those independent skills with either younger kids or kids that might have some disabilities that might interfere with them completing some of those self-care routines. Allow yourself enough time in the morning to get those things done. And don't try to tackle all of those routines all at once, because that can be overwhelming for not only the child, but for yourself. So tackle one thing at a time. It might just be that, you know, you focus on having your child pull their pants up all the way. It might be modified to that extent. But again, pair that success with a lot of positive reinforcement. And twilleting. Twilleting is always one that we deal with. Again, making sure that you have this in a routine. It's on the visual schedule. You're pairing it with a lot of reinforcement.
Chores. So everybody, we think, unless you're a toddler, everybody should have some type of responsibility and some type of independence within the home setting. One of the reasons that we encourage this is because we like to enable kids to do things that they typically should be doing on their own. When we foster that sense of independence, we see an increase in self-confidence and also a feeling of control and ownership. And when kids have a feeling of control and ownership, they're more likely to engage in activities that might otherwise be not preferred. And we pair these chores with the visual schedule and also with reinforcement. So if the kids engage in chores, if they have to put toys away, straighten their bed, and set the table, they may earn a certain amount of points or a certain amount of tokens that can be cashed in for maybe an extra half hour on the iPad, or they get to watch a favorite TV show, or maybe they get some game time with a special person in the home. Maybe it's mom or dad or somebody else's attention who they want one-on-one. The other reason why we like to introduce chores at a young age and as a part of a routine is to also teach kids that you're not always going to get to do the things that you like. Sometimes you have to engage in activities that need to take place but might not be your favorite. So at a very young age, as young as 3 or 4, a lot of times we're preparing kids for future responsibilities out at school, out in the community. And we want to encourage kids to be team players. So in embracing that independence and that sense of ownership and control, we're also teaching them that there's more than just you in this world and in this house, especially if they have siblings, and you need to be a team player. It also teaches delayed gratification. You may get rewarded for what you do, but you may have to wait. You may have to do 1 or 2 things before you get access to that reinforcement. So that's kind of the way we view chores. Encourage responsibility and independence. It's a good thing.
All right, so to go into how to create a visual schedule a little bit more, this should be individualized based on the needs of the child. So in a lot of classrooms, you'll see the activity schedule for the day. And that's for the whole classroom. And for most kids, that totally is effective. They know what's going on during their day, but there's a select few that might need a little bit more. They might need something that's a little bit more individualized to them. So what you can do is really create their own visual schedule. Again, this depends on the need of the child, the age, developmental range, all of that really dictates how you're going to create the schedule. For, I would say, your younger kids, you're going to use something that's as simple as a first then board. Mm-hmm. You're basically going to put the activity, the picture of the activity, and it's going to be within the column that's labeled first. And then you're going to list what comes next. And you're going to pair it with that language. First, and you can have some kind of self-care routine. First, get dressed. Then, eat breakfast. Something as simple as that. For some of our older kids, we might have a few different activities on that board at one time. And this can range from being within a picture format or can be just written out in words. For some of our older kids, we actually will use some of the just technology to kind of indicate what the expectation is for the day. Because we want it to, the goal is to eventually have that in more of a typical format, similar to how, you know, we as adults have things that are on our to-do list within our electronic devices. Again, great organizational skill for kids to learn, and it really fosters that independence. And, you know, embedding some of those choices within the visual schedule really helps to allow children to feel that sense of control of their day. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Another thing you can do if you have some older kids that maybe don't want to use a visual schedule or are too old for a visual schedule, we create a family contract. We sit down with the family, and you can do this on your own. You certainly don't need Laura and I to do this. Sit down as a family with your kids and make simple house rules and post them in an area of the house where they're visible on a regular basis to everybody. That could be the kitchen, it could be the family room. Some of the simple house rules, you know, using good voice control. What does that mean? It means no yelling or cursing, using kind language, positive language, using good body control, keeping your hands to yourself. In addition to those kinds of things, under your house rules, you could also have bedtime and self-care routines. Following the house rules should eventually result in some kind of reinforcement. One of the things that we like to do with our family contracts here, in addition to making a display that you can hang up, is writing an actual contract and then having family members sign it, mom, dad, kids, grandma, anybody that's involved, because it's a way to remind the individuals that are a part of the contract, hey, you were a part of this, you helped develop this, you signed it, and that means something. By signing this, you're taking on responsibility and you're agreeing to work as a family together to improve behavior and things that are going on in our household. So we're fans of family contracts.
There's a couple of things that are, I think, really key with reinforcement. The one is you need to really figure out what that child is currently interested in. And I say currently because kids are going to change what they like. Like, I mean, it can be on a weekly basis. It can even be on a daily basis. So you really need to figure out what's going to motivate that child, because if you don't have an effective motivator in place, the likelihood of them completing demands, it's going to be very slim to none. The other key point is we go into schools a lot and we will talk with teachers about what their current classroom behavior management plan looks like. And a lot of teachers have some really, really awesome plans in their classrooms, and most kids are motivated by these plans, and they'll work for those reinforcers. But a lot of times we find that the reinforcer isn't provided until the end of the week, or sometimes if it's a larger reinforcer, the end of the month. A lot of kids with some of the behavioral concerns that we're talking about today can't wait until the end of the week, let alone the end of the month. So a lot of times the reinforcement, there's too long of a delay to get that reinforcer. So it has to be more so on a daily, or sometimes even more on like an hourly basis. And again, this is completely individualized depending upon that child's needs. One of the great things to do is, if the child is able to tell you what he or she likes, ask them and write it down. And always be willing to go back and revamp what those reinforcer choices are, and establishing them with a certain amount of points or tokens or whatever you're using as that secondary reinforcer. And if you're going to, we're not really big on going out and getting expensive prizes or taking crazy trips or anything like that for reinforcement, because it has to be immediate. It has to be something that you are able to do within that current environment. So a lot of times we tell parents, use stuff that's already motivating within your house. If they love video games, that's awesome. Limit the time that your child has playing video games, and then they have to earn additional time. So again, not taking those items or activities away completely, but just limiting the time with those items.
So a big question that comes up a lot also is punishment. When should I punish my child? Because Laura and I are in a clinical setting, and our background is applied behavior analysis, a lot of our training is more focused on positive behavior supports as opposed to punishment. So we try to be proactive rather than reactive. But we do believe in certain instances and with certain individuals, again, this is going to depend on the dynamic of the household, the diagnosis of the child, the functioning level of the child. There may be instances where punishment is appropriate. For example, if a child engages in aggression and the aggression cannot be ignored or is hurtful to another individual and jeopardizes the safety, there needs to be a consequence for that behavior, a negative consequence that will decrease the likelihood that that behavior will occur in the future. It may be in the form of timeout. It may be in the loss of access to a preferred item for a specific amount of time. There also needs to be consequences when aggression isn't involved, but safety is jeopardized. So if you have a child that elopes often or that jumps off of extreme heights, we had a patient come in here and tell us that their child was trying to open the second floor windows and climb out onto the roof. That behavior needs to be punished. And in that instance, you know, the punishment was putting locks on the window, because putting locks on the window is going to decrease that child's ability to get out of that window. And it's also taking away something the child likes, which is climbing out onto the roof. But in addition to that, maybe there's the loss of an item or something that's highly preferred. Also playing with objects that are unsafe. If your child is prone to fire play or touching hot stoves, a lot of time the punishment within those activities occurs right in the activity itself. If the child gets hurt or burnt, a lot of time that is punishment in and of itself that's enough to stop that behavior from occurring. If you are using a reinforcement system, the punishment that may be done at that time might be the removal of a certain amount of tokens or points. And again, we talked about the last two, you know, removing a preferred activity or putting your child into a timeout for a specific amount of time. One of the biggest things that we always encourage individuals to keep in mind when they're using something like punishment is to offer opportunities for the individual to earn back something positive at some point later on in that day. So maybe an hour later or 2 hours later, we want to try to bring back the use of those positive behavior supports whenever we can. So it will be important in the moment when warranted, when safety and aggression are questions. By all means, if punishment is appropriate, use it. At the same time, remember, we want to bring about positive behaviors, and we do that through using the positive behavior supports we've talked about so far.
All right, so what else can we do? We have to be consistent. So important to be consistent between both parents. If you have any other caregivers that are involved with the child, consistency between everyone who is caring for the child is extremely important. School, you know, as far as, you know, the child's various teachers or paraprofessionals he or she is working with. Super important for everybody to be consistent. Picking and choosing your battles. Sometimes having too many rules is really overwhelming and confusing for everyone, not only the child, but for the adults that are involved as well. So, you know, you really need to figure out what's the priority and kind of hone in on those things first and then work your way down. Resist giving in. So really difficult to do, especially when you're immediately involved in the situation. But just know that giving in is going to kind of lead into all of those previous behaviors that you initially dealt with. So resist giving in as much as possible, and following through with the consequences. Rewards and punishment. We always say, you know, if you say it, you better mean it, because if you tell your kids, listen, if you don't clean up your toys, and I'm gonna throw all your toys in the trash can, well, the likelihood of you doing that, and I actually heard recently one parent actually did do that, so but most of us probably won't. So just, you know, if you say it, mean it.
That's right. So using simple language. A lot of times, especially when we're dealing with younger kids or maybe even older kids that have some attention issues, we tend to get really wordy in the directions that we're giving. And what we find is that the more clear, the more simple the language, the more likely it is that we're going to see compliance and follow through on the child's behalf. So give one instruction at a time. Before you deliver the second piece of whatever the instruction is, make sure the child completes step one of the instruction, or at least repeats the instruction back to you. That way it gives them additional time to process it, and you also know that they heard you and they understand what the expectation is. If the child is really struggling, and it's not so much a tried and true behavior like noncompliance, but if the child is really struggling with understanding your instructions, help them. We want to be models to show what the appropriate behavior is and how to execute it. And I think that the toughest part in all of this, when we're using language and talking about giving one instruction at a time and slowing ourselves down, is using a neutral tone. Now, I'm a behavior analyst, so I should have this down, right? No, I'm also a crazy New York, New Jersey Italian, so it's very hard for me to use a neutral tone all the time. So that's something as the individual that's going to be intervening in challenging behavior that we all have to work on, because that neutral tone just shows, listen, I'm not angry, I'm not giving you extra attention. This is what has to happen. Put your coat on, if put your coat on was the instruction. So the simpler the language, the better.
And modifying demands. You know, we of course want kids to be able to have the independence to complete tasks completely on their own. Not the case with a lot of kids. So provide help, provide that assistance. But then as that child engages in a modification of that demand. For example, you know, if you're getting dressed and they are struggling to put their arms through the shirt, but then at the end they pull the shirt down to cover their belly, praise that. Great job getting dressed. I like how you pull your shirt down. Things that are as simple as that really will help typically to motivate kids to complete another aspect of that demand in the future. And then be flexible. You know, there's going to be times, and going back to, you know, some of those antecedents where, you know, it's later on in the evening, everybody's tired, and, you know, there's a family room full of toys. Specify how many toys need to be cleaned up, or section off, you know, the trucks so that those have to be put away, and deal with the other things in the morning. When everybody is a little bit, everybody's had a great night's sleep.
Hopefully. That may not be the case.
Right. Modeling is always a great way to teach appropriate skills. Even using that calm, neutral tone of voice is a great way to model for kids just how to speak to one another. And using other kids as the models is so important. So using other kids in the classroom, using your other kids at home, and praising those kids who are demonstrating those appropriate skills so that the one particular child that you're working with can imitate those appropriate behaviors.
And I think for today's webinar, that's all we can fit it into an hour period. We're leaving a few minutes for questions. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. And the information we provided today was very general. So if you have something more specific, we encourage you to ask, you know, that as well.
Nicole, Laura, it's Melanie.
Hi.
Hi. We really want to thank you for sharing your guidance and such concrete examples that you had to offer today. We definitely have a lot of messages coming in with thanking you both. So I do want to start out by sharing with everyone in attendance today that Nicole and Laura have shared their PowerPoint with us, and I will make sure to email that out by tomorrow afternoon to share with everyone who joined us today. We will also be posting a copy of this webinar, a recording of the webinar, on our website, and we will try to post the PowerPoint along with that. So if you need to reference it at a later time, it will definitely be made available. So we do have quite a few questions coming in. The first is, can you explain the difference between an MO and an EO?
Well, that must be coming from, I don't know, maybe somebody that is in school or somebody that went and sought some help and got a very clinical type of feedback. So it's not really appropriate for this webinar, but an MO is a motivating operation, and an EO is an establishing operation. And those are kind of the things that make our reinforcing. So an establishing operation might be something like hunger. If somebody's hungry and they want to eat, it's more likely that if you're using a reinforcer of food, they're going to accept that reinforcer of food. So establishing operations and motivating operations are conditions that make increase the likelihood of a behavior occurring again, and they're really focused on reinforcement and the environment. It's a very, very clinical term. We wouldn't use that when we're talking to our parents or our teachers. We would talk more in broad terms of reinforcement, increasing and decreasing behavior, establishing ways in which the environment can be conducive to reinforcement. That's really the basics of MOs and EOs.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We do have some additional questions coming in specific to CNNH. I'm not sure if you'll be able to offer an answer or if we should just direct our attendees to the CNNH phone number. So we have some people wondering if CNNH is a DDD approved provider.
You know, that's a great question. I don't know if we are DDD approved. I know that we refer a lot of our patients to DDD for services. So that would be a question that I could certainly ask Sandra, and I can get an answer to you if you want to email it out to the individuals that are curious about that.
I definitely will. And also, can you just share what age range you work with, and also if you work with people statewide?
We work with all ages. We call ourselves a pediatric neurology practice, but we really treat from as young as 9 months all the way through the lifespan. Dr. Mintz has been working with a lot of families and individuals since they were young, and these individuals have now turned into adults. And we do a lot of research over here at CNNH, and we get a lot of grants, so we try not to limit our patient base. We will really see anyone that might be in need of neurological or behavioral services if we can help them.
Perfect. So, excuse me, we have a parent whose child demonstrates signs of OCD and has a diagnosis of high-functioning autism. They want to know, how do you handle severe tantrums in public, for example, when something doesn't go their child's way? And how do you offer some assistance to the older, typically developing children to help them manage these stressful situations?
Okay. All right, you want to take it, Laura?
I think that's I think it's a difficult question to answer because there's a variety of therapeutic options that we have. You know, if we're talking about a child who, and I'm not sure what the age is, but for some of the children who we see in this office, if they are high functioning and they are at a certain age, typically around that 8 or 9 years of age, we may actually offer cognitive behavior therapy to address some of the OCD issues.
If you're out in public.
And that might help with some of the community setting issues that may arise. Right. Now, you know, immediately if you're in public, it is difficult to deal with behaviors. Because, of course, as a parent, it is embarrassing. You do have to go to a store and really, do your typical life routines. I think that if you know that there is going to be a particular issue, because your child has to go and look at something, or if your child wants to buy a toy, or something like that, we always try to prepare that child as much as we possibly can.
Right.
So really setting up the whole scenario, and being really specific about it, and limiting the time within that community settings, such as a store. A lot of times we talk to parents about, don't plan on going to the food store and doing your 90-minute food shopping trip that day. You might really, again, modify that trip. If you know a particular store or a particular event is going to be a challenging one and you want to start to work on that, maybe go into the food store and prepare that child and say, we're going in, we're getting a gallon of milk, we're not buying toys, you can look at the toy shelf for 2 minutes and carry a timer with you, and then we're purchasing the milk and we are walking out. And if that is successful, then you definitely pair that with reinforcement at the end. So I think that if you're dealing with some severe behaviors in a community setting, it may need to really be broken down like that. I think that the parents and the child would benefit possibly from additional therapeutic approaches.
Because we will use things like social stories.
Right.
And I'm sorry, Laura, if you said this and I'm repeating it, but when you go into the store, give the child a specific list. Give the child specific jobs. And then there are times, too, we do work with some kids that have some significant behavior. There are times, too, when the tantrum is so intense, we tell the parents, leave your cart, you have to leave the store. Because at that moment, that may be the best option. Because also within all of this, we also want to always maintain the integrity of the child that might be having the tantrum.
Right.
Thank you so much. Can you talk a little bit about how you would provide a punishment or a negative consequence to a child who is doing something dangerous if they won't sit in a timeout and are screaming and kicking?
Sure, that's actually a great question. I don't know how much of a fan of timeout I actually am, because in kids that we're using timeout with actually need to have a pretty big skill set for timeout to be successful. So if you have a child that is constantly getting up or is kicking and screaming and isn't going to stay there, timeout is likely not the best punishment option for them. That may be where you want to restructure your punishment. Like what can we do in that child's world that's going to have an impact, that's going to be meaningful? Because if they're in timeout and they're getting continued attention and they're kicking and screaming, we then run the risk of whoever's administering the timeout getting hurt if they're getting hit or kicked. The screaming we can ignore. But that may be an instance where you use a token system and the child loses their tokens or they lose access to a desired item, and you can create a little spot in your home, what we like to call a cool down zone. So it's not a tried and true timeout. It's an area where we say, okay, put some pillows, put some bean bags. We don't want to make it overly reinforcing, but direct the child to that part of the house. Say, you know what, you need to chill out. You've lost access to whatever the preferred activity would be. Go take some time in the cool down zone and chill out. That would be the quickest answer we could give you in a webinar like this. We know that there's much more involved, but that would be one of the quickest answers we can provide you today.
Thanks so much. I think, we really have to be aware that sometimes you're going to need to ask maybe 10 more questions to provide that specific answer. So
Right.
definitely appreciate you, giving us this general advice. So I'm going to give you, I know we have time for one more question. We'll try to maybe sneak in two. So the next question is going to be, my son is having behaviors at school. As soon as he comes home from school and he has had a behavior in school, he will not get his reward at home. But then he follows all directions, doing what I asked him to do at home. So does he get the reward for his good job the same day?
Well, the answer to that is yes, yes, yes. Because one of the things with reinforcement is the delivery of reinforcement needs to be immediate. So if the kid is working for something in school and, you know, maybe has a hard time and doesn't earn, that's fine. They should have another chance to earn in school tomorrow. What happened in school shouldn't always necessarily affect what's going on at home, because we don't know all the variables that were in that school environment. What were the triggers to this negative behavior that prevented potential earning when the school day was over? So I think that there needs to be rewards and reinforcement in the school setting throughout the day, and then at home there needs to be rewards and reinforcement throughout certain things at home. Because if a child is doing great at home, completing their chores, completing their homework, then yeah, that child shouldn't continue to be punished for incidents that happened 6 hours earlier. I mean, what do you think, Laura? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think this is something that can be written up in like that family contract. I love the fact to carry over behaviors at school into home, because I do think that kids should be responsible for their behavior. And that can be simply stated on the contract, as far as you know, indicating appropriate behavior at school gets a certain amount of points, tokens, whatever you're using. But maybe inappropriate behavior at school has a loss of points or tokens. But then once the child is in the home, he or she's able to then make up for that and really, complete homework, complete household chores, just appropriate behavior with other family members. And those are things that should be rewarded, because that's the focus. We want to reward those appropriate behaviors.
You don't want the day to be a total loss either, because if you continue to get pummeled and just hear about no, 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 you can't have this, no, you can't do that, no, you didn't do this, I mean, at some point, that's when the kid's just going to throw the towel in the air and say, well, why am I even going to bother? It's already no. I lost it at 12 o'clock this afternoon in school. Why the hell should I do anything when I go home? All right? It's like a domino effect, a very negative domino effect. So
if you don't mind, I am going to just facilitate one more question to you, if that's okay. I know that we are at 1 o'clock right now. The last question is going to be, my 8-year-old in school is having a very difficult time. They've tried almost everything that they're hearing you speak about on a webinar. And as soon as they put a demand on, especially in a school environment, this child is showing some behaviors. And at the same time, this child is getting attention from their peers. So now it's kind of a routine for this child to have these behaviors at school. Can you offer any advice?
Yes. So basically at this point, if they have exhausted what they currently have kind of like come up with amongst the staff there, I would tell parents it's time to get a functional behavior assessment. And so what that is would be somebody who either has the credentials of a board-certified behavior analyst or has extensive experience conducting functional behavior assessments to go into that classroom setting, do a thorough observation. We typically will do a full day observation just because we want to get a good insight as far as maybe the child is changing classroom settings, and then also to get a comparison between those academic settings versus time spent in cafeteria and the playground, things like that. And then a lot of data collection to go along with this, because what we would want to look at is what are the antecedents, what are the behaviors, how often are they occurring, how often are they occurring in comparison to the peers in the environment, what are the typical consequences, including peer attention for those behaviors, and then really come up with some recommendations based off that, and then possibly even an individualized behavior intervention plan.
And a lot of the things that we're talking about for the home, to go back to that other question about the reinforcement system, you know, occurring at school, should it be carried over into the home? That's another piece also, that if the child has an IEP, we would want the specifics of that behavior modification plan to be incorporated into the IEP. And everything that Laura just talked about now with the functional behavior assessment and data collection and what might come out of that assessment, whatever comes out of that assessment, if it's a behavior plan or certain strategies or use of visuals and reinforcement, those kinds of things should then also be incorporated into the child's IEP.
Nicole and Laura, we thank you so much again for all the advice that you've offered us today. And to everyone in attendance, we thank you for joining us over your lunch break. We encourage you to visit the Family Support Center of New Jersey website at fscnj.org, or you can visit us at transitionmattersnj.org for any future webinars, and also to listen to an archived session of this webinar. Laura and Nicole, I believe your website is thecnnh.org, is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect. So please, if you're interested in contacting the Center for Neurological and Neurodevelopmental Health, please visit their website for additional details and contact phone numbers. We thank you again for joining us today. Laura and Nicole, thank you so much for your time and dedication to everyone by giving all this information. Really helpful, and I thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
You're very welcome. Thank you for
everyone.
You too.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.